my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Motif Medical. Motif designs insurance-eligible products for busy moms. With a focus on innovation and empowerment, Motif's line of breast pumps and maternity compression garments are sophisticated yet discreet and made to support mothers as they navigate new motherhood. Discover why moms are reporting more milk in less time with the Luna breast pump and see how you can get it covered through insurance at motifmedical.com/birthhour. At the end of this episode, I'll have more information about the Luna breast pump from Motif Medical. I'd love to take a minute to tell you about our online childbirth course called Know Your Options. This course takes you from the final weeks of pregnancy all the way through preparing for birth and postpartum, as well as a bonus course all about pumping, storing milk, and preparing to go back to paid work if that's part of your plan. You can see all the different modules laid out for you and more information at thebirthhour.com/course. When you sign up for the Know Your Options course, you get lifetime access and instant access. So you can work at your own pace, and we would love to have you join the private Facebook group for that course, as well as our bi-weekly Zoom calls. So again, head over to thebirthhour.com/course to get all of the info and use the coupon code 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. We'd also love to tell any new listeners who haven't heard that we have a Patreon group. You can head over to patreon.com/birthhour to see all the information there about how to support the podcast and in return get fun perks and bonuses such as access to our archived episodes and our private Facebook group for our Patreon members. So again, that's patreon.com/birthhour. Today's guest is Paula Mallis, who's going to share her daughter's birth story. Her daughter was born in a hospital, and Paula spent a lot of time talking with her OB before the birth and setting up the birth room the way that she wanted it. And it ended up being almost like a home birth within a hospital with candles and dim lights and things like that. And since becoming a mother, Paula has also become a postpartum doula, and she shares a little bit about that as well. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode. Hi, Paula. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thanks for being here today to share your birth story.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about you and your family.
My family and I, we live in Venice, California. My husband and I moved out here 7.5 years ago from New York City, where we met. And we found ourselves here in Venice, only meant to be here for a few months and never went back. So this is where we live, and we had Madeline here in Los Angeles. So she was born actually in West Hollywood. That's where we live.
Well, let's talk about finding out you were pregnant and what type of birth you were planning for or preparing for in your mind as far as the ideal birth you wanted to have.
Sure. So I was wanting to have a shift. I was looking for a shift. I was looking for a different career, really on a path of finding my purpose. And I came across this doula training, and I was really interested in just seeing more of what that was about. And having had a few months earlier, my husband and I had just gotten married, and of course getting pregnant was a part of that after our wedding and starting to try for a baby. And so I was like, oh, what's this doula thing? And this will probably get me prepared, and let's just see what this is all about. So the weekend that I went for the doula training, I found out that I was pregnant with Madeline. I think I literally peed on a stick and went to the training the next day. And it was so wild because I just naturally, I guess intuitively, was being called into the process for myself. So I decided not to go into the doula work at that time because of finding out that I was pregnant, and just wanted to be on my own journey in pregnancy and just kind of see what it was all about. And then see after giving birth to Madeline if that would loop back into something that I would want to pursue or check out more. I was so excited when I found out I was pregnant with Madeline. We had not really been trying that long. I did prepare my body for a few years before getting pregnant with Madeline. I had some health issues, and so I did a lot of preparing, and my husband and I, even just the month before we started trying, we started writing songs to her and really was a part of a conscious conception and bringing her into what would eventually be our family of 2 going into 3. But yeah, my pregnancy was really amazing. And I, because of the doula training, was obviously really involved and excited and interested about the birth process. And I started looking for doulas. And I ran across this midwife, Elizabeth Bachner. She's the owner and founder of Graceful Birthing here in Los Angeles. And she was offering this service called Monatrice, which is basically a midwife who is your doula, because I had chosen to give birth in the hospital, but I wanted that midwifery care. I wanted that doula support. And so Elizabeth was able to give me a little bit more hands-on things, more medicalized things that she could do to support me than just hiring a doula. So she was my doula for the birth for Madeline. And she was such a huge part of my preparation for the birth and educating me and really talking to me about birth and preparing me and my husband, which was such a huge process of the preparation. And of course, I took childbirthing classes, and I'm really involved in my Kundalini yoga practice. So I did a lot of Kundalini yoga when I was pregnant. I was probably one of the only persons in the class pregnant in a regular Kundalini class. I would not recommend that, but it was really powerful. The foundation of the Kundalini yoga was really powerful to support me in preparing for the birth. All the meditation and the keep up exercises were really supportive, and ended up being able to use all of those tools that I learned in those classes during the birth experience. So when I was working with Elizabeth, my husband and I, our intention was to have what I now use the language as unmedicated birth. At the time, I was saying natural birth, and we knew we were going to birth in the hospital. And so I was really wanting to do whatever I needed to do to prepare to support myself for an unmedicated birth in the hospital. And like I said, again, Elizabeth was such a huge part of supporting me and preparing me.
How are you feeling towards the end of the pregnancy? Were you still feeling really confident about the birth, or did you start to get a little bit nervous, or how did those last weeks look for you?
The last few weeks, my mom was here, so I remember she and I think at one point were playing like Uno or something, just waiting around for Madeline's arrival. And I started to go into what I thought was labor. And so I'm walking around the neighborhood, and I have my little contraction app, and I'm like, woohoo, I'm in labor. And I'm passing my neighbors, and I'm I'm in labor, y'all. And then it completely stalled. And there was something about that was really humbling for me. I really thought that was the beginning of a continuous laboring process where I would meet my baby on the other side, and it completely stalled. And I think prior to that, I had been really, I would even say, cocky about the birth experience of just I'm going to do this. Nothing's going to get in my way. None of these, interventions are going to happen to me. And I was just very cocky, and something about going into that false labor and then my labor stalling for I think it was about a day and a half, was really humbling. And it really allowed me to go, wow, maybe this is an opportunity for me to just completely allow myself to let go and trust that anything could happen. And yes, I've prepared and I'm ready, but something about the cockiness kind of fell to the wayside from that experience. And then, like I said, about a day and a half later is when it started up. But when it started up, I was like, well, this might go away again. So that cockiness had left me, and I was more able to be in the moment and present for when my body started to come back with the contractions, which then ended up being the entire laboring process and the birth of Madeline on the other end.
So when you went into labor and it stuck. How did you know that this time was different? Or did you do the thing a lot of moms do where they kind of like question it for so long, like, oh, I'm not really in labor, because they've had a false alarm or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was definitely that. I was more of just like, is this happening? Is this not happening? But again, there was something about having already had the experience of some really early contractions and then it's stalling, that it actually helped me. One of the things Elizabeth shared with me was, ignore contractions until you just can't ignore them anymore. And because they were so early, I could ignore them. So I did, but I was still very humbled by it. So I was just kind of like, okay, I'm in labor, but not, and it may stall again. And again, it just really allowed me to have this openness about the process. Mm-hmm. I guess the next thing that I really remember is the early labor, then went into something a little bit more intense. So where I had experienced two versions of the early labor, so the early labor and then the stalled, and then it came back and then I kind of ignored it. And then it hit this next level, the contractions kind of went up a notch and I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is happening. And then I lost my mucus plug and I started to bleed. And that's when I was like, okay, this is definitely happening, like for sure. But there is this one thing that happened the night before when I was having these kind of lighter contractions. I was sitting on the toilet and I felt like I was hallucinating, and I caught Elizabeth in the middle of the night and I was like, what is going on? And I was just felt so lucid. And I guess some women experience a DMT kind of experience right before going into labor. And I had one of those experiences. It literally felt like I had taken drugs and I was hallucinating, and I didn't enjoy it. And Elizabeth was like, just enjoy it and call me tomorrow, and like hung up. But I couldn't enjoy it. It was so intense. But at the same time, it still really prepared me for what was ahead of me. So when my labor started to come back after the stall, I just started to kind of, like I was saying, ignoring it a little bit. And then I remember I was sitting on a birth ball and I was actually wearing a dress. I was sitting on a birth ball and I was just kind of moving around and just like laughing. And Elizabeth had come over to check in on me. And my mom is like I was saying, I'm from the South, and my mom was here. And so she was fixing salmon croquettes in the kitchen. And I'm like sitting on the birth ball and just having these like smaller contractions. And then Elizabeth goes, okay, I'm going to go. When things get a little bit more intense, just give me a call. And so we really just hung out for the rest of the day, and the evening was starting to come, and I went and I got in the bath, which felt really good. And the contractions started to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And so I naturally just found myself starting to light candles and putting on relaxing music. And my husband, of course, was sleeping. I feel like that's what most men do during birth, is sleep. But my husband was sleeping. My mom, of course, was up and just hanging out in the living room. And I was laying on the sofa, and the contractions really started to get strong. And so I'm just breathing through them all and just laying on the sofa, and it's getting more and more and more intense. And so I let my mom know that Todd, my husband, should probably get out of bed, and we should give Elizabeth a call to come over and kind of assess the situation and see, if it was time to go to the hospital or not. So I'm laying on the sofa. It's really beautiful with the candles and the music and everything, just as I had envisioned it to be. And then that was it. It definitely was time. Things were getting really intense and things were starting to move fast. And so we got in the car, which, oh my gosh, laboring in the car is the worst. Oh my gosh, my husband, bless him, he was so nervous. He was driving so slow, and I could just feel my mom just wanting to just bring her foot over to the gas pedal and just like slam on it. Like, let's get this woman to the hospital because this baby is going to come soon. And I did. I started to, one of the, like, I guess it was like the peak of active labor right before transition was my experience in the car. And at one point in between contractions, I was like, go. go, hurry up. And so he picked up the pace. And then this was like one of the most controlling parts of the birth was that in between another contraction, I ended up, and of course my mom's from out of town, so she doesn't know how to get to the hospital. And I'm literally having to tell my husband how to get to the hospital in between contractions, of course. But anyway, we finally got there. And we made it to the hospital, and I just could not get to the toilet fast enough. That is where I wanted to be for whatever reason. And so I literally just started throwing all my clothes off, went right to the toilet, and literally sat on that toilet for 4 hours straight, laboring. Just wanted to be in the dark, by myself, in the bathroom, on the toilet. And I really felt safe there. I felt really safe, and I really wanted to be by myself. And the labor was intense. It was really intense, but there was something about sitting on the toilet that felt really safe. And during that time on the toilet, I was really allowing myself to get into that primal birthing mama zone. I really did a lot of breathing, and I really allowed myself to moan and groan and just even move my hips and my body in whatever way I needed to on the toilet and in that dark room by myself. And somehow I got away with that at the hospital, by the way. I wasn't hooked up to anything. I'm not sure how I got away with that, but I did. And then there was a moment where I started to get scared, and fear started to show up for me. And the intensity of the contractions were starting to get, I was done being by myself. So when I felt like I needed support, I called out for Elizabeth, my doula. And she came in and she sat on that bathroom floor and she moaned with me and she groaned with me. And she just kept telling me that I was safe and that I was okay and that I was birthing my baby. And she just had this beautiful, soft, healing voice that just felt like the voice of an angel. And I swear, without her willingness to sit on that bathroom floor and talk me through that really fearful moment, that challenging moment of, oh my God, this is so intense. Why did I sign up for this? I don't know what would have happened had she not been there. But with her support, I felt that I could do it. When she was in the bathroom with me and she was supporting me and just loving me and just truthfully holding such a beautiful space for me, I started to think about my brother. And my brother, it'll be 16 years in a couple of weeks that he passed away. And Madeline was obviously getting ready to be born. And it was around, well, she was born in between the day that he died and his birthday. And so this birth really just felt like an opportunity of celebration for this time of year, when every year prior was sadness, a lot of sadness and a lot of loss, feelings of loss. And so during this time of having Elizabeth holding space for me in the bathroom, I started to tune into my brother and my brother's spirit. And I really felt that he was there with me and supporting me. And I had this beautiful vision of him just playing the guitar and singing to me and just loving me from afar. And it was a really, 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 really powerful experience that I will never forget. And it was so healing to have had that. And then my water broke. And when my water broke, because I was sitting on the toilet, it sounded like someone had dropped a crazy, loud, huge water balloon from like the very top of a building. It definitely sounded and felt like one of those movie moments, which not every woman's water breaking, that's not necessarily their experience or really what it always looks like. But when the water broke on the toilet, all of a sudden I came out of that kind of lucid experience of my brother being there and Elizabeth and her words and this like really beautiful spiritual state. And I just hit the ground and was back to earth so fast. And then it started to feel really intense because I felt Madeline's head, and the midwife at the hospital came in to check me, and she said that I was complete and that I could start pushing. And so they were prepping the bathroom, which again, I couldn't believe that this was happening at the hospital, but they started to prep the bathroom for me to give birth there. And my doctor was not there yet, but he was very he was very in the loop with everything that was going on, but he had not arrived. And I really love my doctor, and I had a little bit of an attachment to him. So of course I wasn't going to not have this baby if I needed to without my doctor being there. And it had nothing to do with any safety issues that I was feeling. I just love him as a person, and I just really wanted him to be there. And I'll never forget sitting on the toilet, and they're getting ready to start letting me push on the toilet, and I see him just like fly by, getting ready to deliver Madeline. I mean, he was just getting all suited up. And as soon as I saw him, then I felt like I could really relax, and it was like time to have this baby. Well, then my leg fell asleep. Oh my gosh, as if it wasn't enough. And then my leg falls asleep. And then I'm like, I cannot have this baby on the toilet. My legs falling asleep. It was like my leg falling asleep felt like it was more pain than the contractions at the time. I was like, I have to get up. And so all of a sudden I just felt like I had to get up. So I got up off the toilet, and I got out of the bathroom, and I got to the hospital bed, and I'm like leaning over the hospital bed, and my doctor, I love him so much. He was willing to get on the floor of the hospital floor with a flashlight to check me, because he had not checked me yet, to see what was going on. And he was like, oh yeah, this baby's coming. And funny enough, after all the doula prep that I had done, all the childbirthing prep, all the movies I had watched, I was like, I will not push this baby out. I will not labor on my back. I just saw myself like squatting and pushing my baby out. But because of the way my pubic bone is shaped, actually being in those, what I at the time thought were these like empowering ways to birth your baby, just felt horrible. And actually the best way for me, I felt that I could really birth Madeline was laying on my back. So that was just an interesting thing that came up in the birth, of just that I had judgment about birthing on your back, probably because of watching Business of Being Born. But it actually was the best place for me, and my body really enjoyed being on my back to birth Madeline. And so I got on my back, and my mom really, up until pushing, really struggled. She was there, and she really struggled with me being in labor, her being my mother. All she could see was her daughter in labor and in pain. And really, I was fine. I was a woman in labor, just working really hard. But she just couldn't see that. All she could see was her daughter in pain. And so I felt like I had to work extra hard to just not think about that, because I could really feel her worry and concern and fear in the room. But when I got to the pushing part, I really felt her support. My mom was on my right and my husband was on my left, and I really felt my mom's support during the pushing. So whatever fear or worry that she had during the rest of the labor, I just felt like she could really help me during that time of pushing and birthing Madeline. And so I started to push, and that was so intense, and it was hard. I would say for me, looking back, the hardest part was pushing. My baby was also almost 10 pounds, so that's probably why. But it was the most challenging part. It was also the most grounding experience I've ever felt. I've never felt so much in my body and on this planet as when I was pushing Madeline out. And so Madeline was born into my doctor's hands. And then Dr. Rothbart passed Madeline over to my husband, Todd. And then Todd placed Madeline on my chest. It was an incredible moment when Madeline was born, and just, it was so beautiful. There were no lights on. I had those little like flameless candles and the music in the background, and they just had like the one spotlight so my doctor could see what he was doing. But she was really born in this beautiful, dark, serene beautiful room. And the hospital and the nurses were incredible. They were just so supportive and loving. But I think it's because they tuned in to the space that was already created. So between myself birthing and how I was relating to the birth, how my doula was relating to the birth, how my husband was just so solid and there and relating to the birth. And even though my mom was a bit in fear and worry, there was more support and sacred space created, and everyone just kind of followed suit. The nurses just followed it. Even the midwife who was taking care of me until my doctor could get there, they were all just following the zone of what we had already created, which was really beautiful. And I feel like a lot of times women who are wanting home births, they're really just wanting that experience that sometimes is a little harder to work for in a hospital, of that serene, calm, sacred space for their baby to be born into. And I really got to experience that in the hospital.
So it sounds like you had the birth that you kind of imagined and hoped for, and that everything went really well for you. How was the recovery process and those postpartum days in the hospital?
Well, I was only at the hospital for 24 hours. So I was able to leave. Madeline was born at 4:09, May 10th. So 4:09 in the morning. And we left that next evening. So when I got home, my mom had prepared the house and it was really beautiful, and she prepared a meal and everything. And my mom was so incredible with helping me with Madeline, and my husband was so great. But to be honest with you, I really struggled with support for myself. My dear friend is a postpartum doula, and because of what I know now, she offers her whole thing is Mother the Mother. And I really wish that I had had a postpartum doula for me. I felt really confident as a mother. The breastfeeding went really well. I'm the oldest of 4 children. I'm the oldest of 13 grandchildren. So I really felt confident about raising a baby. But there was something about having that support for myself, someone that I could talk to about my experience, that I really felt like I was missing from the postpartum period.
Did that affect your bonding with your daughter, or how did you feel emotionally in those moments? Or is it just something you look back on now and kind of wish you had spent more time?
It definitely didn't affect the bond that I felt with my daughter. I felt that was very strong, and I was connected to the mother ring piece, but I didn't know how to take care of myself. So having the bleeding afterwards and having to wear basically a Depends underwear, and the cramping and just the emotions and the hormone shift and all of these things. And of course, I feel like I could have reached out, but I wish that I had already had that support set up for myself to support myself. And my in-laws came within 10 days of Madeline being born. And that was really stressful, to be honest, of having a lot of family in a really small house with a new baby and lots of emotions and a lot of hormonal shifts. It was really challenging during that time. And again, I wish I had just had that one-on-one support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like having visitors can be really great if they're the people that you feel completely comfortable, half naked, milk leaking, bawling in front of.
Yes,
but that's if exactly it's anyone
what
else,
was happening. That's exactly what was happening. I was like, I did, and I was so engorged afterwards that I was like, exactly. I was so uncomfortable. I was leaking, and I was just, again, bleeding and just hormonal and sad and crying. And I wasn't in a place to entertain. I wasn't in a place to take care of anybody else. I could barely take care of my newborn 10 days old. And there was no really, I'm like, how do I even take care of myself postpartum? What does that even look like? And so for me, it's interesting thinking about having another baby, which I am absolutely wanting to have another baby. And gosh, I almost think about who's my postpartum doula going to be. I think about that first than I do the birth of, again, just having that support on the postpartum side. And I see that a lot with clients and just women across the board, it's all about the birth. It's all about the birth, like the birth, the birth, the birth. And then there's like within a second you become a mother, and where's that support and what does that look like? And I think that I just thought, well, I love my husband. He's amazing. And my mom's a nurse and we have a great relationship and I just won't need anyone. And that just wasn't the case. And I definitely will not have visitors the next time. That was really, really challenging. That was very challenging.
And you don't know until you're in it, that it will be hard. Some people are up and ready to go and want to be out at the mall or whatever. So it's just kind of individualized to each person.
Exactly. And I had not a lot of awareness around a 40-day practice, the sitting moon, the fourth trimester. I had heard a little bit about it in my doula training, and obviously being in the Kundalini yoga community, it's a part of the practice in Kundalini yoga to be with your baby indoors for 40 days. Mm-hmm. And eat Ayurvedic foods and really replenish the body after everything that it's been through. And I just did not really, I don't know what it was. I guess I just was so focused on the birth that I just, even with the little bit of knowledge that I knew, I just didn't put a lot of focus on the post. And I definitely would honor in a modern way the 40 days. I don't think I could just lay in bed with my baby for 40 days. I don't think that suits my personality fully, but I would like to create more of what I had in the birth, which was this beautiful sacred space. I would love to have been able to bridge that into bringing Madeline home and really holding that sacred space, whether it be for a week, 2 weeks, whether I did the full 40 days or not. But just really wishing that I had done that. And also for my husband, I wish that we had had more time. He had a lot of work stuff going on and just really wasn't able to be there and available in a way that I had wished. So I think for me, because the birth unfolded so beautifully, I think for me, it was more looking back on the postpartum and what I would have done different. But what I will say that really, really, really helped support me during the postpartum period were the placenta pills. They saved me. And I was really fearful of postpartum depression because of my own history with depression and anxiety. And my mother suffered severely with all four of us with postpartum. And so when I knew about placenta pills and I did my research, that was something that I was really adamant about doing and having. And I lived for those placenta pills. I cried when I took my last one. They were so precious to me because they really did support me postpartum with all the hormonal changes. So I was really grateful for those.
That's awesome when those are helpful for people.
Yes.
Make a really huge difference. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing since having Madeline. I know you're really involved in the birth space.
Mm-hmm. Well, Madeline, her soul and the birth of her really birthed a new version of me. And I really got to experience that the birth of Madeline, there was also a birth of a mother. And I will never be the same since then, since the birth of Madeline. And like I had mentioned in the beginning, I had started to search for my purpose. Why am I here? That's what I kept coming up to me before I got pregnant with Madeline. I was like, I know I'm supposed to be here for something. What am I supposed to be doing? And I felt called to be of service, but I just didn't know what that would look like. And so when Madeline was about 8 months old, I went and I took a Kundalini prenatal yoga teacher training. And after that teacher training, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a birth worker. I want to do birth work. And from my own experience with my doula, Elizabeth, I even right after the birth and seeing her and her coming and visiting me afterwards, it wasn't even so much of thinking of it as like, oh, I'm a doula and I'm going to start this business and da, 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 da. It wasn't even about that. It was more of if I could just offer what Elizabeth had given me in that moment to another woman just one time, I have to pass on what's been given to me. I just have to be of service to a woman the way that Elizabeth was of service to me. And through getting an opportunity to do that, after my prenatal teacher training, a woman in my class asked me to be her doula at my first birth. And I will be eternally grateful for her trusting me, having not been witnessed a birth, just my own birth. And she said, you have to be there. And I'm so grateful for her, because that was the beginning of me being of service and holding space for women as they went through the transition from maiden to mother. And that's really how I got into this work, was through the birth of Madeline, led me into birthing myself as a mother, myself as a doula, myself as a facilitator, myself as a birth worker. And so that's really how it all began, was through the birth of Madeline.
So cool. I love when having a baby just kind of changes your whole world, basically. I mean, everything. I know it does for everyone as a mother, but when it changes your kind of life's path as well for your work. So very cool. Are there any resources that you haven't mentioned that you wanted to share with listeners?
Well, I just want to share one more piece about sharing birth stories, and just want to thank you so much for the work that you're doing and holding space and allowing women to share their birth stories. And when I felt called to bring this work into the community, it was, again, from my own experience. When I was pregnant with 3 other moms, and we all had very close due dates. And we all had our babies within days, hours, or weeks of each other. And so when our babies were about, I think the babes were maybe like around 4 or 5 weeks, we got together at my house and we had tea and we talked and we cried and we shared our birth stories. And I will never forget that moment that we had together, where we could come together, the 4 of us, and share so deeply. And every birth story was different. Not one person had a similar story, but the one thing in common is that we all birthed our babies. We all became mothers. And it was just so powerful. And so again, through that experience, I just felt called to offer this. Every woman should have an opportunity to be able to be in community and share in this way, because to pause and to honor the transition between maiden to mother it's so powerful. And so I'm so grateful and blessed that I get to be of service in this way and hold space for women to share their birth stories.
Yeah, me too. Makes 2 of us. I love it.
I know. Well, let's see. Mindful Birthing for the Pregnant Mamas is a really great book. It's a really beautiful book. I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but if you Google it, you can find it. Okay. Placenta pills. I mean, it's not uncommon to get your placenta encapsulated anymore. It's a lot of people know about it. I mean, there's been a lot of people in the celebrity world that have done it. So there's been a lot that's been kind of out there, and there's a lot of information about it as well if you just Google it. I know even my sister-in-law who gave birth, well, one lives in North Carolina and one's in Oklahoma. My mom she couldn't believe how much the placenta pills had worked. And I think that she saw how the shift that I had, and then was so adamant about gifting that to my sister-in-laws. And so she did a lot of research, and she was able to find someone even in these smaller towns to do it. So placenta pills for sure. And community. And even if it's just having a pregnant buddy, or if you're not pregnant and you've already birthed, finding that mom community, finding that mom girlfriend. We don't have to do this alone. I could not imagine having gone through experience and even conceiving, especially, which this could be like a whole other podcast, but conceiving second child has not looked anything like it did the first time around, and having that support from conception all the way through motherhood. So however women can tap into that or create it in their own community. That's really my biggest passion, is just seeing women gather more, because we need it It's medicine for us. And there's so much opportunity for healing when we get together in a loving, sacred space.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Paula, for taking the time today to share your birth story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for giving me the space to share it.
Now I'm going to chat with Ashley about Motif Medical's Luna breast pump. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to chat with me about Motif Medical and their breast pumps.
Thanks for having me, Bryn.
Can you tell my listeners a little bit about you and your background?
So my background is actually in nutrition, and I worked for WIC as a nutrition educator for a while, and then became an IBCLC in about 2017. I started my own business at that time, probably just prior to getting my certification, just doing breastfeeding classes and support groups, things like that. I had my own little girl in 2015 and breastfed her for almost 3 years. So I have different perspectives kind of coming in from all angles and backgrounds when it comes to breastfeeding and support needed and that sort of thing. When I revamped and kind of gone a little bit more tech savvy with better promoting my own personal business, I was able to come in contact with Motif Medical, and they reached out wanting someone that kind of sees eye to eye with them as far as similar goals and similar outreach, and their approach is very similar to what I try to do, and that's trying to make breastfeeding feel more like something anybody can accomplish. You don't have to be super granola or anything like that to want to breastfeed and breastfeed as long as you want, or pump exclusively or, anything like that. They try to meet the mom where they're at and kind of give it more of a modern approach, that really, really speaks to me. So I've been working with them for a little over a year and a half now as their lactation director, and a lot of their blogs and information that's more medically geared or a little bit more in depth with lactation is written by yours truly. So it's a great collaboration, and it's been an awesome journey working alongside them. It's a great team.
Very cool. Yeah, I love all the content they're putting out to help educate as well, and so it's cool to know that you're behind that.
Yeah, they always collaborate and come up with topics that are relevant, and a lot of it is generated by questions from consumers and people looking to get a better pump and that sort of thing. So it's questions coming from the source. So I know that by answering those things, I'm answering things that are important to people that are reading it.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned making breastfeeding, a little bit less daunting and more accessible. And I think that one of the big components when it comes to breastfeeding, obviously there's so much around getting the latch and milk supply and all that established in the beginning. But I also think that pumping is really overwhelming. It's this crazy contraption that you've never used before. You feel like you're, being hooked up to like a dairy cow machine. So what are some of the things you really like moms to know about pumping before they, if they've never used one before?
So I think being more acquainted with your pump is important. Mm-hmm. And that's if you can get one while you're still pregnant and you don't have the burden of trying to figure out motherhood. A new baby is very overwhelming, even if it's your second or third or fourth. If you got a new pump, take it out of the box, play around with it, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But something I really want to stress is, if you don't have a pressing need to pump, you don't have to pump right away. Right. And I think having a pump or being given a pump while you're still in the hospital setting, perhaps, whatever the case may be, it's kind of like, well, it's there. Maybe I'm supposed to be using it. Mm-hmm. And then those questions of, well, how often and how long, and should it fit a certain way? Should I use a certain strength? It just opens up a can of worms of all these questions. So, I think first and foremost is be familiar with your pump if you have to use it, and then figure out if you even need to use it in that time, and not be afraid to ask questions when it is time to bring out the pump. There are people like myself who are at the ready to answer those kinds of questions, and it is so okay to ask. It's not a stupid question to ask about when and how often and all those sorts of things. It's very important to ask.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that what you said about getting familiar with it even before baby is born is great, just because there's so many pieces, and you might actually take the time to read the directions and get all the parts put together properly versus, sleep deprived postpartum and
Right.
getting things in the wrong place. But I know for me, I didn't really, truly pump until I went back to work. So, do you have any suggestions for people that are planning to be, spending time away from their baby and needing to pump for that reason, as far as like introducing the pump, like how much should you, have stored and when should you start using it and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty anxiety-inducing kind of thought process for many moms if they're not sure how to go about that. So if you know when you're going to be returning to work, or know when you're going to be separated, maybe you're traveling and not bringing baby with you for whatever reason, I think it's good to kind of have a plan of action, but not let it overwhelm you. I think we're all guilty of going on Pinterest or Googling and seeing freezers that are just packed full of stored milk and thinking that's the gauge, that's the rule of thumb of what you have to have in order to be away from your baby and be successful with pumping. And that's not the case. So I think if you have a good week, 2 weeks ahead of when you are going to be away, that's great time to start storing. Or to start beginning to that pumping process. You don't have to do it from day one, as soon as you have baby. If you're going back to work 3 and 4 months down the road, start a week or 2 before you have to go. Depending on how well you respond to a pump, you might get away with only having to pump once or twice a day.
And is it better to pump after baby eats, or?
That's a very common question. I think the best time is, number one, first thing in the morning. And then if baby's still asleep, go ahead and pump. Has been my example. But everybody's different. So the biggest thing to keep in mind is a lactating breast is never truly empty. And so emptied breasts, as in expressed breasts, make more milk faster.
Right. Supply and demand.
So, exactly. So, you don't have to feel super full to know that you still have milk. And so a pump is not going to completely drain you. And if baby acts hungry and you've already pumped, you can still put baby to breast and offer to nurse. Baby's going to get things out that the pump can't. And you're already replenishing what you've pumped out too. So you've got that going for you too. So, trying to just take a deep breath and not overthink that part of it of the before after baby is fed, I think is very important too. It's just keep in mind you've got more there than what you were able to pump out. And something else to keep in mind too is, you may be pumping for storage purposes, but you're going to need to pump even while you're away. So that's going to be going to your stash as well. And that's for health purposes too. You can't be going, 4 more hours without pumping or expressing. So, keep in mind too, that's going to be adding to your stash. It's, as far as amounts needed, a baby that's under 6 months of age averages about an ounce for every hour of the day. And now they may go 2 and 3 hours in between feeds, so that means they take in 2 to 3 ounces of feeding. So you can use that calculation to figure out how many ounces you need. If you're away for an 8-hour work day and it takes you 30 minutes to go to work and 30 minutes to get back, that's 9 hours away from baby. So you need approximately 9 to 10 ounces of milk. It's not a lot when you break it down like that. It can kind of take the pressure off mom too to have all of that prepared.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that your point about pumping in the morning is so good, because it can get really discouraging if you're not pumping as much in the evening. And so seeing those full bottles in the morning is good motivation, I think, to keep pumping.
That's a great point. It kind of sets the day off to a very productive start.
Yeah. So what have you seen with the Motif Luna? I've used this pump, and I've used a lot of breast pumps over my 3 kids, and this has been by far my favorite. I just feel like it's super efficient. It's 1,000,000 times quieter than some of the other ones I've used, and I find the flanges are really comfortable. But you've talked to a lot of moms that have used it, so what are you hearing about it and noticing yourself?
Well, honestly, I'm hearing a lot of the same thing. Moms are loving how quiet it is. I know that it's kind of distracting enough when you're trying not to think about the fact that you're pumping. You're trying to relax. You're trying to, maybe change your mindset on what's going on so that you can have a better output. A quiet engine really helps that. And the fact that it's still strong enough to double pump. And what I mean by that, if listeners aren't familiar with that term, this engine can keep up strength-wise, having both hoses hooked up. Mm-hmm. So we typically think of strength power, and it makes sense that once that strength has been divided into two tubes versus it all going into one tube, if you're just pumping one side or the other, that it might lower a little bit. Mm-hmm. But what I've seen is it doesn't affect whether you pump one side at a time or both sides at a time. And so moms are spending less time pumping, and they're getting milk out with this pump that they're not necessarily getting out with other pumps that they may have tried if they've had that opportunity to compare. So I think that's pretty remarkable to point out, is this engine keeps up no matter if you're single or double pumping.
Yeah, I've noticed that I can finish in about 10 minutes versus maybe 20 with other pumps. And by 20 minutes, my nipples are pretty uncomfortable. So I'm grateful for that faster pumping time for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, I hear that a lot. 10, 15 minutes, most moms are done. And I mean,
I don't even notice. Like I realize, nothing's coming out anymore because I've been checking emails or something. And I'm like, I should turn this thing off.
So it's like a really efficient baby, which is really hard to mimic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good stuff.
Any tips I mentioned that the flanges are really comfortable for me on the Motif. I don't know if I just lucked out, trying the best fit, but any tips for that? If people are feeling like maybe they don't have a good fit, what should they be looking for?
Yeah. So I teach the I love you sign with your hands, the thumb, the index finger, and the pinky. Mm-hmm. And the pinky being the smaller size, it's usually around a 21 millimeter. If your nipple is larger than that, and you think you might need to go a size up, you're feeling any pinching feelings or rubbing, that sort of thing, go a size up. Try a 24 millimeter or something like that. The 27 is indicative of like the thumb size. So we think 27 for the thumb, 24 for the index finger, and 21 for the pinky. And so use that to measure the diameter of your nipple. And if you see a bunch of rubbing going on the narrower part of the flange, it's time to move up a size, or even down a size if you're getting too much breast tissue. If it's clamping on the areola, you're actually kinking that hose, if you will, if too much tissue is being gathered in there, or if there's a lot of rubbing going on. So playing around with different sizes if you need to, maybe even use a lubricant. I know some people use like a nipple balm or coconut oil or something like that.
And putting it actually on the flange, not just your nipples, is something I learned, which I did not know with my first pumping experience.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that tip as well, because that is a great little word of advice. Some moms are just a little bit more sensitive, or maybe they're kind of in between sizes. Maybe they've got some fluctuations going on. Maybe baby's been cluster feeding. There's different reasons why you might be experiencing just a little bit more discomfort in times and not in others. So, that's a great tool to have in your toolbox to make things a little bit more comfortable. Something else you can think about too is measuring each individual nipple. I've had plenty of moms that have to use two different sizes. So,
good point.
they're sisters. They're not twins. So, make sure that you have the right size for each nipple. You're an individual. Always remember that.
Yeah, I think that really goes to the whole thing where people always talk about one side produces more milk too. Yeah. It's just so interesting. And mine's been that way with 3 kids. It's always been the right side is my big producer. So.
The super boob.
Yep.
Yes, sisters, not twins. And what's interesting too, just a little side note there, is with every pregnancy, the alveoli, the organs that actually store your milk, get bigger and more numerous with each pregnancy. So that it could probably stand to say that we lactate a little bit easier with each pregnancy.
Yeah, and it comes in faster, at least for me. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this great advice with us. And then if you want to send any of your favorite articles you've written, I would love to link to those on the show notes page as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some great ones coming out. We're covering the battery powered Luna and all of the great versatility and conveniences that offers without sacrificing, strength and all of that good stuff. So be on the lookout, and I'll send those links over to you.
Yeah, I'm so excited for the battery-powered version because it's like the one thing that Motif didn't have. They have the smaller handheld battery one, but getting this, like you said, the full-powered Luna with the battery-operated option is really nice. It looks exactly the same. So we were talking about it before we started recording that there's not really any differences other than it's more convenient. So that's great.
Exactly. Tote it around with you, and if you've got other kiddos and you need to follow them around from room to room, you don't have to unplug or, anything like that. There's just so many possibilities with this new option. I love that Motif has once again given us another option for our moms.
Yeah, and the Luna's already like smaller and more lightweight than a lot of pumps. So I think having a battery operated version just makes sense too because it's so portable already.
It's perfect sense. Perfect sense.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for chatting with me today, Ashley.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.